Hey guys, it's Ettore. Before we dive into today's episode, I want to ask you something. What's your story? We all have one, and sometimes it takes the right space and a little guidance to bring that story to life. That's why I created the Ink and Authenticity Men's Creative Writing Workshop. It's a unique space for men to explore their identities, reflect on personal experiences, and use writing as a tool for self-discovery. Whether you're an experienced writer or have never written a word, this workshop is for you. Join me and other like-minded men on this journey. Visit authenticityroad.online/workshop to learn more. Thanks. And now on to today's episode. Let's take a deep dive into a topic that touches the heart of what it means to be a man in today's world. We're exploring the complexities of masculinity, the power of vulnerability, and the transformative potential of relational leadership. Joining us is Donald Bialkowski, a seasoned therapist and relationship coach from Madison, Wisconsin, who has dedicated over 2 decades to understanding the intricacies of men's psychology and couples dynamics. In this episode, Donald shares his own transformative journey from dealing with personal struggles to finding his purpose in helping others. He's got some incredible insights and practical advice that you won't want to miss. Our conversation uncovers the challenges men face in expressing vulnerability, how traditional gender roles shape emotional expression, and the crucial role of relational leadership in fostering genuine connections, both in personal life and within the broader scope of society. So, whether you're looking to deepen your understanding of your own emotions or seeking ways to enhance your relationships, this episode offers valuable insights and practical advice to guide you on your journey. Listen as we explore how embracing vulnerability and stepping into relational leadership can lead to a more authentic, fulfilled life. So let's get on the road. Welcome to the Authenticity Road podcast.
We started this podcast to share our stories and hear from others about their adventures in men's work.
Join us on the journey to our fully authentic selves, emotional healing, and the meaning of modern masculinity.
Here on Authenticity Road.
Hello, and welcome to the Authenticity Road podcast. I am Ettore, and today on the show, we have Donald Bialkowski. Donald is a licensed clinical social worker and experienced therapist, relationship coach, and meditation teacher with over 2 decades of experience. His expertise lies in men's psychology and couples work. Donald is the founder of Aligned on Purpose, a private practice in Madison, Wisconsin. His mission is to empower accomplished men in navigating personal challenges, enhancing emotional intelligence, fostering deeper connections, and achieving fulfillment in all areas of life. We are thrilled and delighted that Donald is here with us today. And we are going to, in addition to finding out how he became involved in the world of men's work, we are also going to chat a bit about men's work in the context of relationships, or should I say relationships in the context of men's work. It is a chicken and egg situation when it comes to this stuff. So, Donald, welcome to the show. We are thrilled and delighted to have you here.
Hey, thanks, Ettore. I'm thrilled and delighted to be here.
So before we launch into my questions, what would you like the folks listening to know about you?
Oh my gosh. I maybe just a little sort of current snapshot of what my life looks like. I'll start there. How about that?
Cool.
So I'm currently married to my wife, Kelly. We've been married 18 years. They've not all been glorious years. It's been a journey, but I think we're finally starting to figure out, what's needed to be in a healthy, growing relationship. So, in all honesty, Kelly is a great life partner. I'm lucky to have her. We have 2 kids together. I have a 15-year-old daughter who's super challenging most days, but lovely as well. And then a 12-year-old, similarly. It's just he's got a big heart. He's a great teacher for me. And so they're kind of the center of a lot of my work, actually. Maybe we'll get in that today. I talk a lot about relational leadership. And so when I think about that, my work, both professionally and personally, I'm thinking a lot about my family and my partner and then people beyond that. But I'll just start there. That's a little bit about, some people that fill my life.
Cool. So let's chat about how you got, well, let me rephrase that, because I feel like, unlike some of our guests, you have two separate legs here of what you do. One is psychology or social work, and the other is the world of men's work. And just in full disclosure, I met you through Men Living, and Sean Emerson from Men Living has been a guest on the podcast before. And in fact, that is how you and I discovered each other. That piece of it was in the context of men's work rather than in your social work. So how did you find your way to the world of social work? And also, how did you find your way to the world of men's work?
Yeah, so it's interesting. I feel like in a lot of ways, I'm kind of a newcomer to men's work, although I've been kind of sitting in men's circles for about 5 years now. I don't know what the duration is on new or what. But men's work wasn't really something I had put a lot of thought into until I would say it was necessary. And I can come back to that a little bit. But I'll speak to the social worker in me. So I grew up in largely a single parent home. There's a lot of alcoholism in the location where I grew up here in the Midwest, and depression was in my family. And so in hindsight, I think I ended up in like social work and mental health specifically. So I'm a licensed clinical social worker, which is like social worker with a specialty in mental health. And so it just was intriguing to me. I was in Colorado working at a homeless shelter, and it was just really interesting to me. I just thought psychology was interesting. I was sort of drawn to it. And I moved back to Madison and went to graduate school to become a therapist. That was what I was interested in doing. And, in the end, I think it turned out like it was sort of my own way of trying to really heal myself and really like become integrated, become whole, sort of figure out my own shit, if you will. And so it was kind of both of these things. It was interesting to me. It was a direction I wanted to go. And it was also a way for me to try to like run away from my depression and alcoholism and my, stuff from my childhood. And so, yeah, that's an interesting question. Sometimes I'm not so sure, like if I pursued it or it kind of pursued me. But that was
sounds like it kind of pursued you.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, like I didn't have a choice. But yeah, so I went to graduate school and I worked at the VA hospital. For many years doing outpatient mental health and working with a lot of PTSD and depression and anxiety, sort of the whole full range of humanity. And that was a really great part of my life. And then the pandemic happened and my life just fell apart like many people's may have or did. Everybody's life shifted. But for me, it was kind of a number of currents coming together. And, when I went back to graduate school, my life kind of split into two. And one of those paths was like professional development and success and leadership and, all this, like a professional development. And then the other part of me was still sort of balancing substance use and kind of running away from myself. And I had developed a sophisticated balance that, on the surface, I even kind of fooled myself thinking like, all right, I got my shit together. I've got, I'm married. I've got 2 kids and a house and all this stuff. And
so like
it turns out functional substance user. Yeah. And I started using substances as a really young age to kind of cope with depression. And I successfully fooled myself for a number of years and then it all fell apart. And which was the best thing that happened to me is what, Leonard Cohen's got a line in one of his songs that says, "The cracks let the light in." And that was really sort of what happened for me. It allowed me to kind of see parts of me that were arrested at a really young age. And that really falls into a constellation of masculinity. Like I had never hit I had all this anger and all this rage. There was all this suppressed stuff. Like I didn't even really know was there, and I had to do something with it. And I started actually sitting in with Mankind Project. I started sitting. That was the first group that I really started doing men's work with, and that really kind of opened things up to me around a number of themes and ideas around masculinity. And so then that sort of kind of lit a fire under me. I came to realize that my work in healthcare was sort of a safe play for me. It was just time for me to leave. And one of my friends had said, you kind of give away your best stuff for free. And I was like, man, I got 20 years of clinical experience and meditation teaching, and mental health went virtual at that time. And so, so I just saw an opportunity to start kind of exploring men's work, really, again, kind of exploring me as a way to kind of like heal myself. But only this time I had a lot of skills and perspectives that I could bring to the process. So that's sort of a long-winded response, but
no, it's a perfect response. Not long-winded at all. And so that makes me, first of all, I want to go back to the very beginning. And we'll get back to your journey in a second, but you used the term relational leadership in your introduction. And I'm curious what you mean by that term, what that means to you. And if you could just talk a little bit about that, because you piqued my interest with that term.
Sure. Yeah. It's a term I use a lot. And, there's a few layers there, but I would say ultimately relational leadership is about connection. And I think in a lot of ways, how we talk about leadership, it's typically individually focused. It's about, outcomes, success are sort of like outcomes, or it's achieving a particular goal. And those are all really great things. I'm not against that sort of version of leadership, but relational leadership has more of an emphasis on the human beings that are involved in whatever's being pursued. And it's sort of like, this kind of common sense approach. And we know this, and the data is there. Research, tells us this, that it's like, if you care for and protect the people that you are leading, you will bring out their best. You will allow, and so relational leadership for me is kind of about creating conditions. It's about, ensuring that the container is optimal for everybody who's in it to grow and to thrive. So that's kind of how I think about relational leadership. It's an emphasis.
That's great. And how do you bring that to your work? Do you work with leaders in the context of helping them grow professionally, or how does this play out in your practice?
Stay with us. We'll be right back.
Hey guys, it's Ator again. Sorry to interrupt the show, but I want to tell you about something I'm really excited about. If you've been listening for a while, you know how important it is to take time for self-reflection and growth. That's exactly why I've created the Ink and Authenticity Men's Creative Writing Workshop. This is a 6-session online workshop designed specifically for men. Whether you're looking to explore your identity, challenge societal expectations, or simply find a creative outlet to process your life, this workshop gives you the space to do that. It's not about being a professional writer. It's about telling your story, digging deep, and connecting with others on the same journey. Each session is filled with prompts and discussions that will help you understand yourself better, all in a supportive and open environment. So if you want a way to write, reflect, and share, join me for Ink and Authenticity. Just visit authenticityroad.online/workshop to learn more and register. Now, let's get back to the show.
It's a bit, you said the chicken and the egg. It's kind of a chicken and the egg situation. It is reciprocal. I would say that I often begin with the self and relationship to self. I don't know if that's my training as a psychotherapist or as a meditation teacher. I'm really interested in, working with how we are in relationship to ourselves, because that, like a pebble in the pond, just sort of ripples out. It's like if you're on good terms with yourself, then you don't waste all that energy suppressing or avoiding or controlling or managing or, like that energy you get back, and it's able to sort of go towards really, again, like the container, and making sure that everybody around you is supported in the best way. So, but sometimes it's helpful, and a lot of guys come to me because maybe their marriage is falling apart or they're in some kind of relational trouble. And so sometimes it can be useful to sort of begin with the relationship. There's an old line in couples counseling where you say that the relationship isn't the problem, it just reveals the problem within you or within me. And so if you think about, so often I can use a relationship, whether it's me work or we work, you can use the relationship as kind of a mirror, like it shows back to you areas of growth for you. And, so sometimes it's both, I guess.
Right. Right.
But if you're not on good terms with yourself, you're not going to do well in relationships. So I might give a slight priority to kind of self-leadership is sort of a term I use for that focus.
Cool. I don't want to use a crowbar to make this work or a shoehorn, but somehow or another, to me, this harkens back to men and the way that we are socialized. Because the first thing that you said was, a lot of times in leadership, we look at outcomes. And I feel like that's a really male way of looking at things. Gotta get success, gotta get the thing, gotta get the, whatever the goal is. Whereas, so for example, I work at the company that I work is about 1,000 people, but the practice that I work in is about 70 some people, and it's women led. And I feel like, although they keep their eyes on the outcomes, I feel like the leadership inside that organization is much more concerned with the human element and human beings than with the specific outcomes. And so I'm curious if you think that what I'm seeing here is what's really true. Like, are men more focused on the outcomes and therefore need a little bit more guidance in being more human focused?
I believe so. Yeah, I think how I think about it as well is it really comes down to how we're socialized. And it's the reason we're having conversations around masculinity, because that, it's kind of like it's no longer relevant to the context, this version of masculinity or this focus. It's kind of like, I often use the computer metaphor, it's like MS-DOS was really great as IBM's first operating system, but it doesn't work anymore, Right. And like that old version of masculinity, which, I'll use the word patriarchy to put a label on it, and that's a loaded word, but essentially, patriarchy is just an orientation of power over. And that was really useful at certain stages of history. But we've never been here before. We've never been in these kinds of conditions where basically it's obsolete. If we have power over, I'll say like women, we have power over women, now women are like, screw you. Like, I'm out, right. And that's why we see like something like 60% of men between 18 and 30 are single, and 50% aren't even looking, honestly, I talk to a lot of women and they're just kind of like done, it's like, and so that's not the fault of men, right? Like this is, I had to come to terms and sort of like awaken to this idea. It's how we get socialized. this is clear too. Sometime between 3 and 5, it's almost pre-verbal. Men get socialized; they get disconnected from themselves. Terry Real, the great couples therapist, says it's the original wound of men is disconnection. So I have from my childhood, I just in ringing in my head still, quit crying or I'll give you something to cry about.
Yeah,
At a very, very young age, I was conditioned to know where certain emotions like belonged, right? Any of the soft emotions, like vulnerable emotions. So it's not allowed, but basically then that trains me into not allowing and having that whole skill set, that whole constellation of human emotions, which then becomes a problem now as I'm a dad and I'm not a traditional going to the mill, make a paycheck, that kind of thing. But I got 2 kids, a wife to keep happy and satisfied, without those skills, you're kind of like a kindergartner being asked to do long division. You just don't have everything you need to get it done. So it's a little bit like society and the messaging and socialization is a little slower to adapt to the speed of how like some other elements in terms of power and control and, like these other sort of cultural aspects have evolved. So it's a mismatch.
Yeah. Yeah. And you used a different metaphor than I use. I always use palette of emotions. I feel like girls are socialized with a palette, an emotional palette full of colors that they can paint with. And boys get an emotional palette of 2 colors, right? Happy or angry. And those are the colors we get to paint with. And so learning that all those other colors, just if we were given that gift early on, things would be different. But it's interesting that you sort of went to a place that predicted one of the questions that I had for you. So I'm just going to go ahead and give you this question. How do traditional gender roles impact men's emotional expression and vulnerability in relationships?
Well, they shut it down. They lock it down. I think I often refer to this as the masculine double bind. So we hear all the time, a la Brené Brown, who I love Brené Brown's work, by the way, but like, there's been more visibility or more talk around being more vulnerable, and you need to be more vulnerable. And this is just what we talked about. Like, that's true. You need to be vulnerable. You need to have those emotions in order to like solve complex human problems, relational problems. But the truth is society doesn't really want a vulnerable man, so it's kind of a double blind. Even my wife, I do this work. And so and she does a lot of work around this as well. So we talk about it a lot, but she said to me, like, she doesn't want a vulnerable man, right? There's something like sort of, she's been socialized in the same water as well, right? So it's not just men, it's women or anybody else who identifies in anywhere in between and beyond. But it's like, I often think about it like in terms of like race. It would be like asking, like, inviting a black man into a room full of white people and saying, it's okay here, like it's safe here, like it's one thing to say that, it's one thing to even aspire to that. And then it's all this intergenerational stuff and all this historical stuff that's also needing to be honored. So, I
what
think,
you said,
yeah, go ahead.
What you said reminded me of No More Mr. Nice Guy. And I don't know if you ever read that.
I have
that book. Yeah.
Yeah.
But basically that as boys stopped being raised by the male elders. So as we moved from agricultural to industrial and the men went off to work and the women raised the children, that women, and I'm not blaming women, hold your cards and letters, please. But that women raised boys to be the models of stoicism and strength that they romanticized. And you were saying your wife doesn't want or didn't want a vulnerable man or doesn't want you to be vulnerable. And So therefore, as we raise our boys, we raise them to be the models of stoicism and strength.
Mm-hmm.
That's what came up for me as you were talking.
Yeah, I love this. I love this. I mean, this opens up a whole sort of door for me around. I mean, I think it's really complex and it's really interesting because I think there's a lot of intergenerational trauma. That we sort of have feminism and Mr. Nice Guy. That Glover talks about this. It's sort of like, the Vietnam War on the heels of World War II, we have major shifts in gender roles. We have major shifts in like economics and like how, and men are leaving the house and divorce is beginning to happen and families are falling apart. And we have all these women that have been oppressed and their grandmothers have been oppressed and their grandmothers have been oppressed and raped and sort of like, I mean, there's all this like trauma that sort of like comes down. And so you have, I believe, this sort of like unconscious energy that is unhealed energy, right? That is, and maybe this is like for another conversation, but the point is like there's more under the surface.
Already inviting yourself back, huh?
Yeah, I mean, I'd love to talk about this. It's such an interesting topic for me, but you know what? I also see it even in individual couples where a man and a woman, let's just a heterosexual couple, for example, but I think there's a gender influence here, so I'm choosing that on purpose. But maybe their marriage has been in a certain pattern for a while, and then something happens, or they get to a breaking point, and then the male partner, the man identified partner, begins to start making changes, and you think like the female partner would be like really excited, like, yay, finally he's changing, he's listening, he's communicating, but she doesn't. She's actually full of anger and resentment. And it's something that needs to be cared for. So it's like a little micro example, I think, on a larger scale, as we start talking about, as men become more vulnerable, which is what society is asking. And, as men become more vulnerable, it's not like the world's opening up. There's actually a whole bunch of energy that needs to be cared for. There's more resentment. There's more rage. There's more of this sort of like trauma reaction. So it's a really sort of complicated situation.
Talk about that for a minute. So, because that seems counterintuitive, doesn't it? That in the face of my vulnerability, you're confronting me with anger and resentment. So I'm giving you what you ostensibly asked for, right? I'm not being a toxic masculine guy anymore. I'm opening up, I'm softening, I'm identifying and expressing my emotions. I am exposing my soft underbelly to you. And it's still not what you want. So, A, what do they want? Well, maybe A is what's behind the anger and resentment, and B, what do people really want men to be?
Great questions. Definitely coming back. We'll have to. Yeah. Well, it's confusing because it's not logical. These are relational issues. Sometimes I'll say these are matters of the heart, and the heart doesn't know these words. So it's about safety and it's about attachment. And it's like it's like anytime somebody sets a boundary, people are dynamic and they get in a relationship, and that relationship, settles into a certain rhythm. It's a system on itself. And when one person changes in the system, that's disruptive for the other person, even if it's sort of quote unquote good. Any change is going to be disruptive to the other person, and disruption creates uncertainty. Uncertainty is fear and vulnerability. So you get a defensiveness out of that. You get a reaction out of that. So that's kind of what's happening on a bigger scale. Like men are being asked to change and needing to change, frankly, because the old version isn't working anymore. I mean, we're depressed and killing ourselves every day, it's not working. So we need to change. but we don't have the internal skills to withstand the disruption. Because we remember the socialization thing, like age 3, quit crying or I'll give you something to cry about. So a lot of my work is around education and just teaching regulation, how to stand in there. A term I love is equanimity, safely enduring. Like how can you set a boundary, be a leader, show up, move in a direction that's meaningful, important, and considerate of everybody around you, and have them yelling at you while you do it, that's, so there's no, it's hard, it's confusing, and there's not a lot of incentive to do it because it's hard and confusing, so.
Yeah. So I'm not sure if this is a clinical social work question or a men's work question, but I'm going to ask it anyway. How do men address these issues in their relationships?
They find other men. They find what I would say specialized spaces. This is why men's work is so important.
And I want to clarify, I don't just mean romantic relationships. I mean that too.
Yeah.
But I think all relationships evenly, both romantic and otherwise, because I think that they're all pieces of the same pie.
And ultimately, it goes back to relationship to self. How am I with fear? How am I when things are uncertain, when I'm confused, when I'm insecure, and those are just mood states, like negative thought states, imposter or perfectionism, that psychology. So, but yeah, I think the answer to both of them, and this is where, the relational piece is both me work and we work. Men need, this is the solution to the masculine double bind. So we're being asked to be vulnerable and being open but then we're being punished and penalized for being that, right? So in my vision, in what I do, what I offer is I kind of curate spaces where I can bring men together so they can have those conversations. Essentially, they can explore in an honest, safe space their own vulnerability, their own experience, just their internal experience, And you do that in the company of other men, and what happens is you get witnessed, you get seen, you get new perspective. You talk out loud, so you understand better what you think. It's sort of like there's some relational pieces that are really important there. So then you can work it out. Then you can go back to whatever space you're coming from, whatever relationship, and be a relational leader. But if we don't have those spaces, there's no way you can work it out. You're too close to yourself. Your mind is not your friend. It's going to sort of like convince you to stay small, essentially, because it's safe and familiar. So I think that's a key piece, is bringing men together, but it's a challenge because we've been socialized not to come together like that, so.
Right. Now, I also, because I have had such success in doing my work, in these men's workspaces in the presence of other men, I'm a great believer of it. But I'm going to pretend for a moment like I don't know the first thing about it and ask you, why other men? Why do I need to do this with a group of men rather than with just a group of people?
Yeah, I love the question. Because you have to be able to see yourself, again, not to use race, but I think race it's a primary characteristic of diversity, like gender is. And so, it could be helpful if I went to speak with a Black therapist, a 60-year-old Black woman therapist that would have value for sure. But if I go see a white, educated dude like myself, there's going to be more reflection of my own experience back onto that. There's less interference. It's a little cleaner is a way of thinking of it. This is why like affinity spaces are so good in social justice work. You know, if you bring a whole bunch of diverse people together, it's a cat fight. You know, it's gnarly. There's a lot of complexity in there. So if you can bring a group that's relatively homogenous together, they can connect more, and the connection is important because then it becomes more relational, and they're building things like trust, and they're working through disagreements more easily, you know, and conflict, and so they're learning those kinds of skills. And again, then from there, you know, it's like you practice that, then you can go out and you can handle those more complex kinds of interactions.
Do you think there's also an issue with men being either performative or unwilling to be vulnerable when there are women in the room?
I would, it's a great question. Yes. I mean, I think, again, we're all in the water together. And so it's really baked in. And yeah, there's complexity in there, you know, there's sexuality in there, and there's issues with your mother, and, you know, there's like, you know, family of origin kind of stuff. And so again, it's sort of like similar to the affinity idea, you know, it's sort of like now, you know, bringing men and women together. It's not like it's impossible. It just makes it more challenging.
So bringing this back around to where we were earlier, and that is the notion of men having the full palette of emotions to paint with, and men being more vulnerable, and men expressing what they need. In the context of relationships, is open communication really the key, or is it something else?
I love that question. It depends. And I don't love that answer. Yeah. Well, let me expound on it. It's tricky because it's an issue. It depends on the maturity level of the individual and the relationship. So for example, if I share with my wife like all my vulnerability and all my difficulty, as we kind of talked about before, that's sort of like, that makes her afraid, essentially, right? Like she's uncertain about my capacity, my ability, because I'm rattled, right? Like she's scared because I'm scared, right? Like my masculine energy is here to protect and make sure her feminine energy can do what it does. And so now I'm expressing to her that I'm shaky. So as you mature and you develop emotional integrity, the equanimity, the capacity to, hold your experience, then when you express it, you can express it and be like, yeah, I'm really shaken, you know, like I was really uncertain, but there's a certainty to that. There's a groundedness, or in contemplative spaces, you hear the word embodiment a lot, you know, like I'm embodying groundedness while also having this experience. And unless you practice that and mature into that, unless you develop that, a lot of men who haven't begun this kind of work, emotional fitness kind of work, is like, it's just really shaky. And that's where then the relationship becomes unstable. Did that answer the question? I don't know. Did that satisfy, or is there, I don't know.
Yes. And I would also invite, so if communication is both the key and not the key, what are the tools that we can offer to men, either through these men-only men's workspaces or through any other tools that you might have? What are the things we can offer men for them to become more effective in their relationships? What tools can we offer? What do we give them?
Well, I do think I do think communication is a skill set that can be taught. So 100% around, I statements and effective listening, active listening, things like that, seeking to understand, moving from complaint to request. There's a lot of different tools and strategies in the communication sort of toolbox. But I think more fundamentally, like the primary core skill is relational mindfulness. It's mindfulness, it's self-awareness. If you are unaware that you're really, resentful, for example, that's going to come out sideways. It comes out as retaliation. It comes out as control, and you might not even really be aware of that. I did a lot of work around that when I shared that. I kind of opened up. I opened up to a constellation of anger, and there's all kinds of different flavors of ice cream there. Resentment and irritation and rage and annoyance and all of those things. And so it really starts with self-awarenessing around that, and then. That's my definition of emotional integrity, is to be able to acknowledge and express your emotions honestly. So I would say that's important. I also like work around values clarification. I think it was Yogi Berra that said, if you don't decide where you're going, you're bound to end up somewhere else. And this is in alignment with that masculine energy of leadership, of directionality, of linear sort of focus. And that's good. Let's, if you're predominantly of masculine energy, let's lean into that. That's a strength. And so I think skills around clarifying that's intentional action or aligned action. If I want to be a man of integrity, then I'm speaking with honesty. I'm moving my hands and feet and behaving in ways that are honestly honest. So those are the things that come to mind, sort of values clarification and self-awareness or mindfulness, and then communication.
So I can't help but go spelunking here a little bit, go exploring the caves. And if you don't feel comfortable answering this question, that is fine. You mentioned at the very top of the show that in your marriage, there have been harder times and easier times. There have been rougher times and less rough times. And I'm curious, for you doing your work, what have been the skills that you've adopted that you think have brought you the most success in bringing your relationship back online?
Yeah, well, I sort of practice what I preach. And so I think, I think finding out what was important to me and what sort of who I wanted to be, what kind of man that I wanted to be, really getting clear on like the character that I wanted to play in my own story. I think was important. And mindfulness, not living my life based on my thoughts and feelings, but, in line with where I wanted to go. And relational mindfulness, I just keep kind of coming back to these, I guess they're core skills, but, I think for me, what was probably more helpful was really the orientation. So I think what I see in a lot of couples, and was certainly true in my relationship, is you kind of come together like toe to toe, like literally you like come together and you're facing each other, and you kind of fall into that orientation or that position, and over time, and maybe you develop professionally and you have kids. This was certainly our experience. And, our lives just started to kind of grow. And we didn't really grow together. And it was sort of this awakening of like, wow, we're really far apart, and we have to like come back together. So it started with a commitment to like change our orientation to create a container. We're shoulder to shoulder. We're no longer toe to toe, we're shoulder to shoulder. And it's not individual empowerment, which is the stuff of psychotherapy, by the way, but like it's relational empowerment, like not what's best for me, what's best for we. And that's complicated. That's tough stuff, so that orientation was important. and then a willingness to kind of do the work, to be honest. Communication is built in there. I think another thing that I say to couples, and we also do here, is, relationships are like anything. They're continuous. They're alive. They're kind of like a tomato plant. If you don't show up and water it every once in a while, it's going to wither and die. And so, like, good relational hygiene, like whether that's reading a book together, or taking a course together, couples therapy, or just spending time together. Like, so being really intentional about caring for the relationship and growing the relationship.
Beautiful. I'm curious. I'm sorry, go ahead.
I was just going to say one other little thing that sort of popped into my head is, I think for me, and this has to do with gender roles and spaces, because as I shared before, and this is Terry Real says the primary wound for men is disconnection. The primary wound for women is a loss of voice. And so there's a little bit of rebalancing there. And for me, what that looked like was learning how to yield in the relationship, just making space, and inviting my wife's voice and opinion. She's been so conditioned to sort of just be second, and so there's a little bit of a rebalancing act there, but I think that kind of comes along with that orientation. It's not power over, but power with, and power together. So,
yeah, I mean, you actually, it's funny because I was about to ask you something that sort of kind of goes with that. And that is that when you said the shoulders are, instead of being toe to toe or face to face or one being over the other, we're now shoulder to shoulder in these relationships. And to me, that spoke of the evolving dynamics of gender relationships. Because it's different. There are different expectations now than there used to be. And so how does doing this work, how does engaging in men's work, engaging in improving our relationships with ourselves and self-discovery and all of that, benefit us in terms of navigating the new world of gender relationships or the changing dynamics of gender relationships?
Well, I often say, like, the first step is, like, just make sure you're not making it worse. And to not do anything is to make it worse, essentially, because we're operating on an old operating system. If we don't do our work, then we become work for other people. And I hear this from women all the time. 80% of divorces, by the way, are initiated by women. They just get, like, fed up. And they've been telling their husband they don't need an extra kid or something. It's sort of like, right. So it's just an example, a very common one, like, of men not doing their work. So first of all, just waking up to that, and recognizing that, maybe it doesn't feel like we're in trouble in any way. I got a job and I'm going and, whatever, it's fine. But your relationships are in trouble. And if your relationships are in trouble, you're in trouble, So, I often talk about ecology, relational ecology, and if you're not, it's in your best interest to do the work and care for other people, because then they care for you back. You're improving the ecology of your life. Yeah. And if you're stonewalling or unwilling or withdrawing or retaliating or shutting down, you're going to get what you sow, kind of thing, So I forget what your question was, but I think it was
kind of about, because you've mentioned several times, masculine versus feminine energy, and also the expectations for men versus the expectations for women. And I'm noting that in our society today, those expectations are changing. And those notions of masculine energy versus feminine energy are changing. that they are not as clear cut or black and white as they used to be. And full confession, I mean, as a gay man, I stand outside of this and look in at this, and some of this is a bit of a mystery to me. How heterosexual relationships work, despite the fact that most of the relationships that I have seen modeled, and maybe that's why, because they were all so bad. You know, I look at them and I go, all right, well, I'm not really sure how this works or what this means. And so that's kind of why I'm asking the question. And that is that as this is evolving and changing and the energies are changing and the expectations are changing, how does the modern guy navigate this in a functional way?
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up, because it is, you know, language is limiting. And so sometimes in terms of discussion, you get into sort of like, you know, men, women, and it's often why I use masculine versus feminine energy, because I think it's more, because relationships are complicated, and they, you know, you could be in one relationship and have more of sort of a masculine energy sort of contribution, and then your next relationship, it may be the other way around, right? You know, so you know, every relationship needs to be honored as unique, you know, and met with mindfulness, you know, met with and really looking at, and that's why a lot of the work, I think, is more granular around just like how well is it working, like the relationship, you know, is just sort of like, it's got this ecological functional thing, you know, it's sort of like, you know, are you treating the other person with kindness and respect, you know, like full respect living, no matter what it is, you know, all these other things we talked about are just sort of, you know, they're important, but like ultimately, you know, how am I behaving? And is that respectful? You know,
I mean, I think that's a great answer. I think to me, that feels like it's hitting the nail on the head, and that is pay attention. You know, I just think, it's like I say to my coaching clients all the time, that I think the number one answer to every problem is to just be present. That if you can be present, then you can have clarity, and you can have the ability to respond and not react, and you can approach things with equanimity. And so the same is true of relationships. If you can be present, then you can see what the needs are, and you can match them and meet them, which is essentially what you're saying, I think.
Yeah, I don't remember where I heard it, but somebody once defined mindfulness as observing, describing non-judgmentally, non-reactively, and that leads to heartfelt action. And so that's just this idea is like, if you're present, non-judgmentally, caring, compassionate awareness, you're already naturally set where, you know, if you boil everything down, it always comes down to connection. I ask guys that come to me, it's like, what I want this anxiety to be gone. Why do you want your anxiety to be? So I can leave the house. Why do you want to leave the house? So I can go have fun. Why do you want to go have fun? Like, you just keep asking why, and it always will come down to connection, right? We are a social creature. We're built that way. So we don't actually need to get there. We just need to get out of our way. And a lot of that is done through self-awareness. Again, not make it worse. And we naturally connect and naturally respect one another and care for one another, because we instinctually know it's in our best interest.
Yeah. You touched on this earlier, just glancingly, and I'm going to go sort of pull it up out of the water and see if there's a fish at the end of the hook. And that is that, you know, you gave some statistics about men. You know, we're disconnected. We are killing ourselves. We are whatever. And
in trouble.
We are in trouble. And so what's the future of guys, right? Where are we headed, and what do we need to head there healthily?
We need more relational leaders. I think, you know, we need, I mean, you know, it can be very discouraging. The data is very discouraging. The weekly call from a mother who's concerned about her 20-year-old in the basement, that I get is concerning. I think I have to come back. We have to talk about the impact of war and World War II and Vietnam in particular. But like the intergenerational trauma, the absence and the traumatized men, we've got a little repair here, I think, because there was several generations where there weren't as many men available as young men need right now. It's mentors, it's mentorship, it's elders, it's somebody to shine a light and show the way, like that kind of thing. And I think there's just a paucity of it. There's not enough men, I would say 50 plus, that are really engaged because they've been, they're sort of an artifact of that generation. And so I think we just need more masculine relationships. We need a mentorship. And those guys are out there. I work with these guys as well. They're just such a quiet group, so the younger generation is more conscious. My 20 to 30-year-old guys that I'm working with, they're aware, they know it, they know something. Part of the problem is there's nowhere to go. I hear this a lot. It's like, man, I just can't, I just want to connect. I don't know where to go. It's all like online. It's like, if it's not a dating app, and there's no dating apps for guy friendship or, I know Men Living has a database and they're starting to grow that, but things like that, I think using technology as a way to connect and bring guys together
in healthy ways, because I want to caution that a lot of guys in their 20s and 30s are using technology to connect in very unhealthy ways. And that's how guys get radicalized or they numb out with gaming or whatever. So connection, but finding connection in healthy ways. I want to address this guys in their 20s and 30s thing about them being more aware than men of earlier generations. And I agree that's true. And yet at the same time, I feel like there is a lot of desperation out there among younger men who feel really disempowered and desperate. And this goes to that lack of connection that I think you were getting at. And I don't really have a question in there other than to say that, I certainly align with what you're saying about them being more aware. I think that they're also, in a sense, that increased awareness is also causing increased pain because they see how not connected they are. Yeah.
It's almost a fragility. It's almost, because I think they're young, they've grown up online, right? They've grown up, they are more disconnected. I was talking to a guy the other day who's, he's gaming with his friend, and like his friend's mom walked in the room. When I was a kid growing up in the 90s, like I had to go to my friend's house and talk to his mom before I could go play video games with, you know what I mean? Like so many of those, moments are gone, they're just not even there. And you kind of get good at what you practice. And if you're practicing avoidance and separation, like, to connect it's even more energy. It's even more threatening. It's even more challenging to do that. So I think it's complicated. I think role modeling, I think visibility of like healthy men and healthy relationships is important. And then having some spaces, so I offer like round tables and men's living, there's a number, this is great. There's a number of like spaces growing up like this, but bringing men together just isn't enough. Like you talked about, you bring men together and it can get gnarly in there and it can get radicalized or it could get, just unhealthy because men don't know how to be in relationship with one another. So, my roundtables, they're curated in a way, and that begins with like giving some basic structure about how you are with other men. It's not a competition about who knows more and who can do, it's like it involves yielding, listening, synchronous talking. Like you talk, then I talk, we respect one another. I mean, they're basic rules, but a lot of us don't know those rules because actually we were taught the other thing. It's like, you get yours, you talk first. There's not enough money to go around here. You better, like it's this sort of competitive thing that becomes really anti-relational. And then we end up rich and alone, or we have all this abundance and all this stuff, but we're miserable and anxious and depressed.
So let's put a bow on the relationship piece with this question. What's your best piece of advice for guys seeking to improve their relationships or have better relationships?
Gosh, I have so many answers to that question. My best piece of advice.
And it can be more than one.
I like the orientation of the relationship isn't a problem. It just reveals the problem within me. And just getting curious, bring some curiosity to your experience. How do you react when challenged, when squeezed in a relationship, I use a model just like a tracker. Every time you have difficulty, do you kind of fall down into shame and get hard on yourself and beat yourself up? Or do you rise up into grandiosity and sort of take a better than, looking down your nose at, sort of projecting kind of position? So, none are either right or wrong. It's just getting curious about how are you showing up in relationships. That's first. Awareness is always the first step. So bringing some curiosity. How do you react to difficulty? How do you react to difficult situations?
Beautiful. Well, I can tell by the clock on the wall that we are reaching the end of our time together today. As you may or may not know, we have 2 questions that we ask every guest on the show. And since you are in the hot seat today, it is your turn. Question number 1 is, what does the word authenticity mean to you?
The first word that comes to mind is aligned, which is, the head and the heart and the spirit all sort of in alignment with one another.
Lovely.
Yeah. Honesty comes to mind as well, like sort of honesty, and that's honest and aligned. I'm just going to share those words.
Yeah, no, those are great words to share. I like that answer. It's complete and yet to the point. Succinct. The other question, and this is your opportunity to freestyle, is what is it that I didn't ask you that you wish you had been asked? Or the other way to answer that question is, if you could talk about anything right now, what would it be?
Gosh, we covered a lot. I think
We did.
Yeah, I guess what's coming up for me, Tor, is just this idea. What arises is a quote from Maya Angelou, which is, "Do the best you can until you know better, and when you know better, do better." And it just resonates a lot in my work because, we always, it sort of becomes then timeless, like we compare ourselves to ourselves. we do so much comparing to outside people, social media, any source that we're reading. It's always this reflection. That's just human. We're just sort of back and forth on, how does that relate to me? And that's all right. It's how we orient ourselves to the world. But I think it's so valuable to shift that comparison to your yesterday self. How am I today compared to yesterday? And that's more inclusive of like, I might have had a shit day yesterday, but my shit day yesterday was like an improvement from my shit day last week kind of thing, right? We're comparing ourselves to ourselves versus, I should always be happy or whatever we're comparing ourselves to. So anyways, right. I'm rambling there, but I'm going to hearken Maya Angelou there.
Beautiful. Very nice. So my very last question is, if folks want to find you, how can they find you?
Yeah, they can find me online. So I'm here in Madison, Wisconsin, but I do coach men from all around the world. I don't have any geographical restrictions, and so people can go online. I offer a free call. It's more of an advisory thing. I find that a lot of people don't even really know what they need. It's like, do I need coaching? Do I need therapy? Do I just need education or mentorship or what it is? So I like to use, that's actually the favorite part of my work, is just kind of getting to know somebody and hearing what is going on in their life, their circumstances, and then deciding on some next steps. And if it's not with me, great. If it's with me, that's great too, but just, it's great to sort of know what next. I hear that a lot,
Mm-hmm.
People don't know what to do next. And so that's a rewarding part of the work that I do. But yeah, so people can find me online. I'm at onpurposementoring.com. The name of my business is Aligned on Purpose. And so you can Google search that stuff. I think my name is maybe on the program or something. There's not too many Donald Bialkowskis out there.
So just like there aren't that many Tortopis out there. So onpurposementoring.com, I will have that link in the show notes along with your name, which is not necessarily spelled intuitively just from hearing it said, right? But I promise you, when you see it written, it makes perfect sense. Just like mine. And, but honestly, I just want to say thank you so much, Donald, for being here. This has been really a pleasure. And this has been a fascinating conversation. I feel like we could have gone for about 3 more hours with this. And although you've already invited yourself back, I'm going to say that I hope that you will come back and be with us again sometime, and that we can dive in even further to some of these topics. So thank you. And folks, on behalf of the show, I am a Tor, and let me rephrase that, because we have one listener who insists that I close the show the same way every time. It is now time for us to throw the bags in the back of the jalopy and get back out onto the authenticity road. So, nice. On behalf of the show, I am a Tor, and until we meet again, please be authentic. Goodbye, everyone. If you enjoyed this episode, be sure to subscribe so you're notified when a new episode is posted.
Thanks so much for listening. We hope what you've heard will help you on the road to your personal authenticity.
Visit us at www.authenticityroad.online.